Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. I'm here with Mike Gunning, the CEO of VR Resources, and Justin Daley, the VP Exploration. The reason for this call today is pretty specific. The project that I think anyone who's a shareholder already knows that is going to be drilled next is New Boston, a copper project in Nevada. And I have to say, this is probably the target that I like best of everything that VR has worked on since I've owned the stock for the last 4 or 5 years. Those of you that don't know the company, VR Resources is it's a greenfields explorer. It's all about scale. This has always been a go big or go home company. That's a double-edged sword. Obviously, sometimes the drilling works, sometimes it doesn't. VR has actually had some success on a couple of the projects, but it's not getting love for it. I mean, the bad news, if you're already a shareholder, is that means the share price isn't that high. The good news, if you're a shareholder or thinking of being one, is your risk reward's actually that much better. I really like this target. It's very large, very interesting, and the important parts of it haven't been drilled. Justin is something of a porphyry expert. He's been doing a lot of the work with Mike on this for the last year and a half. They've actually owned this property for several years. They just didn't really get onto it until last year. So Justin is going to walk through the modeling and the targets and essentially the investment case for the new Boston Copper project. So take it away, Justin.
Thanks, Eric. Here we go. So the big question that I want to answer for potential investors is, how can a copper porphyry system this large and this obvious still be in the ground in Nevada? And that really starts with understanding the history of exploration. On the left, you can see where New Boston is, about halfway between Reno and Las Vegas. New Boston is sitting on right beside the 1860s Carson and Colorado Railroad. So there have been miners traveling up and down this valley for at least 160 years at this point. So I'm sure they've seen these rocks sticking out of the ground, and in fact they've been working on the ones nearby. The other thing that's super obvious about this project is the sheeted veins that we see from Jeep Mine on the west side in the valley all the way over almost to the highway at East Zone, 2,100 meters of sheeted veining, all of it with mineralization, both molybdenum rich and copper rich, sticking out of the ground. And if you walk over the hill in the background of this photo over to the Jeep Mine side, you will see these veins the whole entire way. They do not stop. Another obvious thing is this explosive copper stockwork. When you're talking about copper porphyry systems, you want to see a lot of veining, a lot of cross-cutting veining. This shows you the explosive nature of the porphyry stock as it erupted basically underground and pushed fluid out into the surrounding rock. And we're seeing it at surface in the East Zone Bowl over 400 meters north-south. So this project has scale. Further, it's even more obvious when the first explorers in their first 4 drill holes on the program get a 1,000-foot interval at ore grade molybdenum 0.08% moly. The downside for the project, though, is that this project then became branded as a moly-only system, when in fact we know that there is copper now at the East Zone based on our more modern work and some drilling done in the 2010s. But this work was done by some of the best in the business. Bear Creek had it in 1967 when they did the drilling. They were the exploration arm of Kennecott Copper, which is modern day Rio Tinto, and they had just started to put Bingham Canyon into production over in Utah. So they knew what they were doing as far as copper porphyry systems. Hard to shift your attention away from a moly intersection like this, though. Here at Jeep Mine, this is your 1,000-foot interval of 0.08% moly, and this comes to surface. Everything at New Boston is plunging to the north at about a 60-degree dip inside of these limestones. But this initial intersection, along with some of the work later on by Conoco in the 1970s, led to a 3.14 billion ton model on that molybdenum seen across the system, but especially over here at Jeep Mine. And when talking about moly, this is in fact a world-class footprint, and the copper was an afterthought. In fact, so much of an afterthought, it was not included in any of the sections and historic reports that we've now inherited. So we have no historic copper data for those early intersections at Jeep Mine. Moly, though, here, the largest primary moly producer in the world is Shapingao in China at 2.3 billion tons. New Boston has 3.14 billion tons calculated off of several drill holes by Conoco and Bear Creek in the 60s and 70s. They felt that it was a pretty rigorous, but obviously not reportable geological model. To compare some of the grades, Shapingao averages 0.14% moly. New Boston has 371 feet of 0.14% moly within that 1,000-foot interval.
That high grade copper on the west side there at Blue Ribbon, that's a skarn, right? That's not porphyry or
Correct.
stock.
Yeah. So that's part of the zoning within the system, and why I feel if we get deep over at East Zone, following up this 300 feet at 0.24% copper and almost 6 grams of silver, you're going to see similar grades in skarns as you get deeper. The Blue Ribbon stuff is peripheral and it's more deeply eroded. 92 feet at 1.38% copper, though, is pretty good. And I think that's why we have the confidence to say, as you get started at East Zone with a drill and drill down into the system, you can expect to see copper the entire way, top to bottom.
And
Justin?
not to belabor the obvious, but why would you not? And, I'm not saying you shouldn't chase a gazillion ton porphyry, but what's stopping you from just throwing some holes at that skarn? I mean, does the skarn itself look like it probably doesn't have a lot of scale? It's just something that's bleeding off of the bigger system.
Correct. It's definitely a thin lateral part of the system. There's quite a bit of drilling in it already. It's the most obvious bit of copper sticking out of the ground, so it's received the most attention as far as grade. So at this point, yeah, if you do drill out a billion-ton porphyry system at New Boston, you would add that to the reserves. But at this point in the game, we're interested in putting a porphyry system on the table, not a small ancillary skarn system.
Justin, let me just interject with a visualization for Eric. Can you just flip back? Just to make sure you understand, Eric, the reason that we talk about this, we're willing to talk about this geological model from Conoco, not as a resource, but as a model. The limestone beds that Justin's talking about, imagine them basically coming to surface where I'm standing taking this photo. And they're dipping away from us into the photo at about 60 degrees. And that volume that Conoco is calculating has rigor because you can walk out 2 of the dimensions on surface. You can walk out about 2,100 meters of strike of that panel dipping away from us. You can walk out the 2,100 meters of down dip. In other words, from where I'm standing over onto the other side of the Jeep Mine Hill. And so when you combine that surface exposure on those 2 dimensions with 5 drill holes, you can see that this, imagine a big thick sheet of plywood. That's their volume model. And it's a model that you can literally walk on surface. And that's why I think it's a useful visualization simply for the scale of New Boston.
Right.
The upside for VR 50 years later is that Conoco admits that volume, that sheeted vein block that we're looking at, does not include some type of porphyry stock that is ultimately feeding and providing the fluids that are moving up into those sheeted veins into our photo.
Right.
And that's what we think our IP technology is showing us. And Justin's going to show you that on the other side of the ridge, on the right-hand side of the photo. But that's why we talk about this volume. We believe because we can walk the dimensions of sheeted veins, that Conoco was on the right track for the scale of the system. They just couldn't find the porphyry stock that was feeding it because they didn't have the technology that Justin did in 2023.
Okay.
And it should be noted that just follow up on Mike's comment there, that they hadn't drilled the center. They hadn't gotten to the center of the porphyry system. All of the drilling occurs over here on the western side
Right.
and over here on the eastern side. And they proposed 3 drill holes going down the middle of the system. And as we'll get into in a moment, right now, 1981 happened, inflation was going through the roof, interest rates were soon behind, and big oil companies got out of mineral exploration, period. They literally shut down the drill in the middle of drilling CNB2 right here. And they never got to CNB3. We have no data on whether or not they did anything on either of these 2 holes. I would love to see core from those 2 holes. But they did do a lot of methodical work. Those big oil companies, I get to work with almost a perfect geological map to this date. That's just been digitized basically. A lot of great alteration mapping data, very rigorous work that I could barely hope to match in 2023 with just myself. But again, Bill Oriole, the project geologist, remarking on the incredible size and the enormous potential of this system, but again, focused on the molybdenum. And then in 2011, Frontier picked up the property as part of their Nevada regional exploration programs. It's worth noting that concurrently they were selling Long Canyon to Newmont for $2.3 billion, and a lot of these other projects got spun out into Pilot Gold. They drilled 5 holes across the property, a lot of them essentially repeating the success of Bear Creek 50 years earlier. But they did get a new intersection on the east side of the property, which sort of opens the door to copper mineralization in a way that hadn't been appreciated before. And that, again, is that 279-foot interval at 0.24% copper and 5.6 grams silver, with 0.38% over 60 feet within that. And that's down here over in the East Zone Bowl. But as we mentioned earlier, the big problem here was that Pilot Gold was a gold company. They loved the geology here. They loved the potential of it. They just knew it didn't have gold and it wouldn't work in their portfolio. And 2012 going towards 2018 was a pretty rough market, at which point we picked up the property. And starting in 2023, we had the opportunity to apply modern geophysics, things that Conoco didn't have available to them and things that Frontier/Pilot Gold did not attempt before they put a drill on it in relatively short order. So we did a airborne radiometric, magnetic, and VLF survey, 3x5 kilometer block. It enabled us to see the potassic enrichment in the east zone, something that, other than painstaking looking at the mineralogy in thin section, Conoco could not do this sort of work. You can see this very large radiometric potassic anomaly over here, and it's directly coincident with copper mineralization at surface, with the porphyry stalks, as well as with the copper mineralization heading up towards CCT zone, which is where a lot of those fluids, the copper-rich fluids, are flowing up the siltstone, coming to surface.
Justin, can we just go back? Just for Eric and the audience, on this map, you can see 3 white lines with arrows.
Yeah.
Those are conceptually and to some degree, actually, graphically, the drill holes that Justin and I want to do to show the true polymetallic copper moly silver potential of this system based on all this new data. So again, you're going to see an iteration of maps, but in general, that's the approach that we want to take. And we want to focus on the east side because of the copper and the potassium enrichment and so on. But even on this map, you're going to see Justin talk a lot about, just look at how on this map, the quartz monzonites on the west side are not entirely different from the ones on the east. But look at how you have all this potassium enrichment on the east. You don't see that on the west at Jeep Mine. And look at that dashed line going right through the middle on the GW vein. That's going to be a boundary that Justin's going to talk about a lot. It's probably separating multiple porphyry phases or cells that came up into this system. It's something that Justin deserves a lot of credit for during our field work to recognize not only in our data that you can see on this map, but geologically, Jeep Mine and East Zone are different. And if you're looking for big copper, it's pretty clear you want to be on the right-hand side of this map.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of that new data that we've been able to collect alongside some of the stuff we've inherited from Frontier Gold gives us the opportunity to see mercury moving up some of these structures. Mercury rises up from the volatilization of sulfides at depth, and it's something that you can only do with modern ICP-MS geochemistry. And modern satellite imagery has allowed me to basically on-demand acquire satellite data to show, in this case, where the iron-rich gaussons are located at surface. They correlate with the radiometrics, they correlate with the stocks, they correlate with copper in soil anomalies. We show 98th percentile. This particular soil geochemistry anomaly has 0.8% copper in it. It's sitting right below a iron-rich copper mineralized skarn within the dolomites here.
Right.
Justin, hold on, just go back. Eric, I grew up in Kaminka where if you stood up in a meeting and used the word Gaussian, you needed to be careful. Can you just explain, Justin, just using iogas and this new data, how you can look at iron and aluminum ratio to say this color anomaly in brown that even I can see is actually a real, genuine iron-enriched Gaussian over sulfide? Those dots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with modern, I call it modern, but it's really only modern in Mike's sense. I've spent my whole career using ICP-MS geochemistry, but back in the 60s and 70s, you didn't have full suite geochemistry and use it regularly. It was just too expensive. VR resources now, I think we regularly run MEMS 81, so we get 81 different elements, which I can then bring into my desktop software and compare ratios of everything and anything to try and get a sense of how the mineralogy might be changing, how we can vector into things. And when you have a high iron over aluminum ratio, you have more iron relative to the aluminum that's usually in a clay or any other silicate rock. And it just tells you that there is a lot of extra iron in these particular samples. It's telling us that a hydrothermal fluid came up into these rocks. These are not primary mineral rocks. Nothing on this property is, but these particular areas are extremely enriched.
They're not just brown color anomalies.
No. And Mike's right. You can't just call anything that's reddish brown on the ground a Gaussian. Most of these areas, you will find a stockwork quartz veining in them with just iron oxide bleeding out of the copper mineralized quartz veining. And finally, something that Conoco definitely didn't have is 3D DCIP, direct current induced polarization technology. This is technology that Mike and I love. You set out an array of 3D radio frequency receivers, and then you inject a current into the ground. You get tens of thousands of data points in 3D, and with modern processing power of computers, you can run that into classic IP chargeability models.
Yeah.
They did try running, they had Zong come out to run geophysics, IP geophysics over the New Boston property, and Zong actually said, this isn't going to work here. Please don't ask us to come back.
That was 1978.
1978. Essentially, the argillites on the north end of the property were absorbing too much of the current, and the technology wasn't strong enough to get to depths. And as Mike mentioned, the results of that IP chargeability survey were kind of, we were getting that data at the same time as I was starting to understand this GW boundary zone, which runs right down the center of the hill, the center of the mineralized porphyry system at New Boston. And it really separates the two halves of New Boston, which I think is really important. It's not to take too much credit, but it's something that I don't think that previous workers realized. On one side of the GW boundary fault, you have IP anomalies with weaker conductivity, you have stronger moly than copper, and you have sheeted east-west veins and dikes. On the other side of the boundary, you have a very intense conductivity anomaly. I'll show you why that's important in a minute. You have more copper than moly, and you have stockwork veining and complex plugs coming up. You also have a lot more potassic alteration in the radiometrics. It is very clear to me now, it's obvious that the east zone is a different cell in the magmatic hydrothermal evolution of this district. There is a moly system on the west side, and there is a copper system on the east side. And it's that east zone conductor that we intend to test first with drilling this spring.
Eric, one of the things we talked to Dios about, who did the survey, was the IP anomaly is the elephant in the room, but the prize for copper is that conductivity anomaly.
Yeah. And to put it bluntly, that conductivity anomaly is rocks like this. When you have interconnected sulfides, this particular outcrop is a conductor. It's a very strong conductor, but it's very small and tight and at surface. But that same style of mineralization is evident everywhere we see a conductor and everywhere we plan to test for a conductor. You can see the GW trace up along the hill here. It's sort of represented as a pale orange Gaussian traveling up the hill. And it I think, is a fold hinge, but that's a lot of technical detail we don't need to go into.
Hey, hold on. Hey, Justin, just run back. Eric, look at the geochem below that hand sample. The mercury is like, I can't remember what the mercury number is in that sample. I think it's around 30 ppm. At the blue ribbon skarns arc that we talked about at the very beginning, you would be below detection. And so this is an example of where these veins are showing you that mercury that Justin showed you on that map, coming directly vertically up the main structure.
You're right on top of it in the middle of the system. And despite only assaying 0.26% copper, this rock has been leached. All the copper has traveled downwards into this large crack. So you're only really left behind with 0.26% copper. This rock, I would say right here, is about 15% copper chalcopyrite. Therefore, it's going to be around 5% copper initially. All the moly and silver are in situ, 0.14% moly and 112 grams silver. So this is a marker of what I felt when I first saw this outcrop, is the plumbing system for the larger porphyry system at depth that remains to be tested.
Sure.
This is the kind of fluid chemistry style that we can expect to see when we drill into this conductor on the east zone.
Sure.
It's the same ratio of copper to moly to silver that we see in the intersection from pilot gold right over here on the edge of the conductor. So now, imagining things in 3D space, all these arrows are coming up from depths, from the north, coming to the south, up the plane of these dipping limestone, siltstone, and volcanic ash beds. The fluids going up and into these sheeted veins at Jeep Mine are moly-rich. The fluids coming up through this conductor into the east zone, causing this large copper and soil anomaly, causing this large radiometric anomaly, and certainly causing all these exposures of dacite porphyry at surface, is coming up along this pathway. And same deal, that fluid is coming up along the GW pathway, along this receptive bed for copper mineralization into the CCT zone. Looking to the south through an east-west section of that exact same thing, here are those arrows, the fluids moving up and out from a source at the center of the property. One fluid traveling up this way with your moly copper, and on the other side at east zone, copper over moly. We have a lot more copper in soil on the east zone than you do at Jeep Mine, and certainly we have a much stronger conductor coming up to surface and coming up to mineralization at surface. It's worth noting that everywhere along the way we've seen these gold stars. Here's ND1, where they had 318 feet of 0.14% copper and 0.08% moly. It's on the very, very edge of this conductor. So you're still getting the grades. You're getting lesser copper grades because you're kind of outside of this conductor cell. You're getting similar moly over here as well. And one final view of this brutally obvious geophysical target are these conductors in a north-south section going through east zone. NB1 would be off the pane, off the screen right here, but PNB 5C drilled by Pilot Gold in 2011, right where they intersected this conductor, they got that 279 feet of 0.24% copper and 5 grams silver. Everywhere you see one of these conductors coming to surface, you get crazy copper grades in the soil. You see crazy stockwork copper at surface where this conductor comes to surface. And to make it as simple as possible, conductivity equals copper at New Boston. When you see interconnected sulfides like this, which was taken right on top of that conductor coming to surface right here, right where we want to put our first drill hole at New Boston, it's very easy to tell yourself why there's a conductor here.
Yeah.
Sulfides are basically metals. Metals conduct electricity, and all of these metals are interconnected within this quartz vein. When you interconnect the quartz veins in a stockwork system, you basically have a net textured stockwork system of electrical wires heading into the ground. And it's exactly that what we hope to test.
Hold on, Justin, can you just go back to the previous, just to make sure Eric understands previous? So Eric, the investment thesis for drill hole 001 is the text on the bottom right of this slide. This is a pane looking to the west where we're on the eastern edge of the conductor. And that conductor is about 900 meters in strike length heading towards the northwest. So imagine that east zone conductor that we're looking at is plunging for about 900 meters into the previous page. The next slide, Justin. And that's really the upside, is that conductor is moving away from us, continuously getting stronger in terms of conductivity, amplitude, and volume, according to Diaz, for about 900 meters without a single historic drill hole into it. They were
Only
close.
drilling on the edges.
Right.
When I'm logging this core, I hope in March, and we start here on this stockwork conductivity anomaly, I don't expect to leave copper mineralization for the entire length of that drill hole. And we're talking about several thousand feet heading on an angle from the edge of it, because there's an existing pad there and it's relatively easy to get to, all the way into the center of the system, where I would expect to see some of those skarn type grades, over 1% copper, as we get closer and closer to these causative porphyritic intrusions. And see more rock like this, instead of coming up these cracks near surface, net textured stockworks of this type of mineralization.
Okay.
So the path forward is relatively simple for VR Resources. Start the drill program in March, have results a couple months later, announce those intersections, which we expect to see, raise more capital, and then begin a delineation program on our notice of intent drill permit. We have about 10 sites already permitted, which would allow us to drill tens of thousands of meters into this system, angled holes, spaced holes, which would allow us to get to a 43-101 resource. The plan is by the end of the year.
Quick.
And a lot of that historic work was focused on these silver veins. Nevada is known as the Silver State. We had the railway running through the valley here from the Comstock lode down to California. They were worried about these silver veins, and typically in a porphyry system, you would expect to see high-grade silver, copper, lead, zinc veins peripheral to a porphyry copper system, just like Hercules Silver has demonstrated last fall. You've got a silver system on the margins of a large porphyry copper system. And as far as does a porphyry system fit in Nevada, just to answer a couple of those questions, it does. In fact, the initial geology here for our Bonita project back in 2018 was that it was a Jurassic porphyry system on the Black Rock Arc, the southern extension of the Quinelli and Stickeen arcs in BC. But a couple 100 million years later, we had slab rollback, which caused further magmatism, and you get porphyry copper systems like Butte, Bingham, and New Boston. But New Boston is not alone in Nevada alone. We have several other copper-rich porphyry systems and moly-rich porphyry systems. Of note is Ely Robinson, which is a 100-year mine life operation, close to 1 billion tons, ranging from 0.27 to 0.5% copper. And it's mines like that alongside Bingham and the much younger porphyry systems in Arizona that make the United States a 6% total of global production in copper. They are 6th place, and the US government wants to keep it that way. They've added copper to the critical metals list just last year. as Mike mentioned earlier. And it's that sort of support that we can expect going into the drill program to get something like this developed. We're in Nevada. We're not in Alaska in a salmon hatchery. We're not underneath 500 meters of sacred ground in Arizona. And we're not in people's backyards in Minnesota. We're in Nevada. It's mining country. And that's why majors should be watching this project. Ivanhoe Electric is nearby at White Hills. Rio Tinto revived a joint venture at New York Canyon just across the highway, where there's about 300 million tons of copper, much more structurally complex than New Boston.
Mhm.
And it's time for New Boston to get drilled with modern technology leading the way.
I mean, it looks like a great target, and like you said, you do have historic data. Um, you're still looking for, the prize being the
Yes,
porphyry intrusions that are driving what's obviously a lot of fluid flow. It's a very big system.
exactly.
Hopefully, you start drilling this thing in a couple of months. I I know that you're talking to strategics. I mean, I've made my own opinion fairly plain that I think you guys would be nuts to not do at least some financing before you drill this. You never want to be in a position where you've got no dry powder after a drill program. I mean, this looks like a very high potential, high probability drill program, but we all know Mother Nature's
Mhm.
fond of kicking us in the nuts when we get a little bit too enthusiastic. So, it would just be silly not to do it. And in case, viewers that don't know me, that don't know my newsletter, know the fact that I basically talk about the stuff. I eat my own cooking and talk about what I buy. The fact I'm telling Mike that he should be doing a placement should be a hint to you that I'm going to put my hand up to write a check for the placement if he does one. So that tells you where I'm at with this.
Thank you, Eric. Justin, to close, you can point out one of the reasons that we want to drill is because we can work here cost effectively. And in the top right of this photo, you can see the local water tanks for the town of Luning. You can almost run a hose from those water tanks to our drill. And this is important in Nevada. It's restricted drought. Water's not easy. You can spend a lot of money hauling water in Nevada. I know if you're used to working in northern BC or northern Ontario, you're used to having water right at your feet. But just seeing that water tank at Luning for a project in Nevada is just one of the many favorable things about why do you want to take this project on, is in that photo.
You can spend as much on water in Nevada as you do on a helicopter budget in
Yes.
northern BC, in
Fair to say.
territories, etc.
Fair to say.
Okay. I think that's a good overview, gives people an idea of, why these targets, why now. So VR Resources, VRR on the venture, VRRCF on QB, I believe, in the US.
I think that's right.
Great story. I mean, if you're someone that loves early stage exploration, VR is a great name. I mean, Mike built it and designed it to be a, go big or go home greenfields exploration. That's what these guys are all about. And this looks like another great target with a lot of scale. This is definitely a drill program I think you got to be anticipating and paying attention to once it starts. Thanks for giving us the overview, guys.
Thanks very much for the time, Eric.
No problem.
Likewise, thanks, Eric.